Hi and welcome back. In this video we will talk about the Concourse-CI, which is a very simple CI solution. I started to test it and use it in the last few weeks, and here I am trying to share some of my thoughts in 6 points. So if we check a descriptor of a build or pipeline, as it's called in Concourse-CI, it seems to be very similar to a GitHub action. We have some kind of task, and the task is defined by some Docker image, and inside the Docker image, we are just executing something. But the question is, how is it different from other tools? So let's check all of the points. First of all, this is a container-based build tool, but not Kubernetes-based build tool. So there are other tools like the Tekton-CI or Argo CD, which can be used only together with Kubernetes. So Concourse-CI is very, very simple. So this is my script to start the web component. I have just some local test users and the keys to communicate with the workers and Postgres database. Almost nothing more. And I also have some scripts for the workers, which again, just the keys to communicate with the web part and the runtime. So everything is executed in a container. There are multiple options, but the containerd seems to be the mainline option. So, for example, executing a Docker Compose cluster might be easier for GitHub action because in this case it requires some Docker Magic or something similar. So that's all, but you can just start the scripts, no Kubernetes, nothing more. Even the containerd is packed together. The other important part that it's very barebone. It's quite simple. Even if we just check the dashboard, it's more simple, which can be an advantage. But for example, if you need some kind of secret management inside the build definitions, or you need more informations about the builds or times, then you should use HashiCorp Vault for the secret or Jaeger for the tracing to get a full insight. So because it can work together with other tools, and that's the way how can you get full feature set. Okay. Second, this is a descriptor-based. It's based on descriptor-based builds, not repository-based builds. So there are other tools, for example, the Woodpecker, which is an open source fork of the Drone CI, but Travis CI, which is a hosted solution, is also very similar to the repository-based build tools. When you can enable the build for one repository, and all of the descriptors should come from that specific repository. So the main unit is the repository. In Concourse, the main unit is just the descriptor. So you can start as many descriptors as you would like to do. There is a command line application which should be used because the web UI is so simple, and you can just do a set pipeline and create a name and a descriptor. And in that case, it's very good because it always prints out the differences compared to the previous version. Now it's full green because everything is new, and I can just deploy it, and after that I can unpause it to start. So it's more like the Jenkins, where actually you can create as many jobs as you would like to have, even independent from any kind of source control. Okay, next, this all of the tasks are input and output based. So in Jenkins, you have a workspace. You check out everything usually at the beginning of build, and after that you have the workspace. You can do whatever you would like to do. But there are other tools like the Dagger, for example, or Concourse-CI, which requires very precise definition of the inputs and outputs. So this YAML file is the task definition. So in the previous file here, this is a full plan. It's the job name and the plan. There is task. This task can be, this one step can be defined in an external file, and that kind of definition is here. You can see this, we have the similar properties here. It's a Docker image, and here we have two inputs. It's not the responsibility of the task to define what are these inputs. These are part of the full pipeline. So probably we checked out something to these directories, and we will create some binaries. So the main reason or the main benefit of this, that it's very easy to do parallel execution, because it's very clear what do we need to the build and what should be produced. On the other hand, it also means that everything should be archived and moved to the next step. The Concourse supports different kind of scheduling, so usually you don't need it because it can schedule the same job or the next task on the same node, but it can execute everything in a very parallel manner because it knows what is required for the next step. So if you don't define input, you couldn't do just build because you need something. So if you check out something, then maybe you can define the output at the end to make it reusable by the other steps. Okay. I think the most important part or the most interesting part of every CI is the abstraction behind the tool, and the main abstraction is the resource in the Concourse-CI. So let's say I have a simple, maybe this one. Yeah, this. So I have resource types, different type of resource type, and each resource can be an input and output. Input resource means that, for example, when I check a Git repository, but it can check also a release page, for example. So resource is something which contains multiple versions. So if I go back to here, I think, okay, this is the common. This is a definition where you have a resource and after you have a build. If we check it in the source file, here I have a resource where the type is a Git type of resource, and after that I'm doing something. So this get is a specific step, even with triggers. So this build will be triggered by this resource. So it will check out this repository. The next step is the lint. So from the repository which is checked out in the common, I will execute this task. So if I go to that repository, maybe here, this is the task definition, and you can say that the input is defined. So this is the input which is checked out by the resource, and after that I can do something. So let's go back. So this is the resource itself, and here I can see the revisions. And the resource actually has three methods. One is the check, just checking what's new or what is available. And after that, it can check out. During the check, it also can include any type of resources. But if I go to the resource types in there you can see that these are all resources. So, for example, it can be a Docker image. You can create very easily a new or trigger a new build when a new Docker image is available. Everything is poll-based, so there is no trigger. The resource can just check what's going on. And there are also output resources like the Slack resource, for example, which can do something outside of the Concourse. For example, post a message outside. So usually if the resource is used for the input, it's just checking something if available as new. If it's used for the output, then it usually posts something, a new release, a new Docker image or something. And it's very, very powerful because we can create full trees of builds here. So we can see that this is one version, this is another version. So this is the first build, and it's built with this version. The second build is with this version. And actually, when I trigger a new build manually, I need to define which available resource should be used. So here I can say that, okay, with the same inputs, if trigger a new build, it means that with exactly the same resource. And the other good thing is that these resources are extremely easy to define new one. For example, there is no new GURID resource here, so I had to define a new one, but it's nothing more just a container, 3 binaries, check, in and out. And there is a very simple JSON definition for each of them for the input and output. For example, the check or in supposed to return with a JSON with all of the properties. But it's very easy, so it's extremely easy to extend it with new resources. And I think this is the main power. So there are a lot of tasks which can be hard to do in some other tools, but here I can just create one build with 2 resource trigger, for example, or 3, or if all of the artifacts are earlier built successfully, I can do an integration test. And the artifacts itself are versioned here as resource, or everything is possible with the resources. So I really like this abstraction. But let's move forward. So this is a one very, very small part, but I really like it. So if I go back to my project, there is because all of the inputs and outputs are very, very cleanly defined. Here I have the CI lint YAML, which means that I need a common input, and after that it will execute the linting. So I can say that, okay, this is my local install, and please execute my lint YAML. I hope that, this is supposed to be, yeah. And it will upload the current directory by default. I can define that. Okay, how can Concourse-CI can find a common input? Well, by default, it's the current directory uploaded without the .git, and it will just execute it there. So it's extremely easy to execute any of the steps on the machine, on the CI machine itself. So it's not a local execution, but it's executed on one of the nodes inside the container, which is downloaded in exactly the same way how it will be executed, because that's just the input. Something it's not fair, because by default it doesn't upload the .git file. It uploads only all of the files just to keep it simple, but I can here define any kind of output that, okay, let's say the common output is my /tmp directory or something. Even the output can be defined and they will be downloaded, the binaries, for example. So I can easily do a full build on the CI machine's workers and get the result. I really like, and there is also an option to get a shell script, a shell prompt similar to Docker exec inside the build container. Okay, and the last part is that because it has this powerful abstraction of resources, it has very interesting opportunities to create new patterns. For example, by default, these YAML files are not versioned. Well, the YAML files, the task files, are committed in this case to the repository itself. But if I go back to here, these YAML files just uploaded. But it's extremely easy to make it versioned, because I can commit this one to another repository and I can create a new build which check this repository with the YAML files as a resource, and it can just create new pipelines. It's a very typical pattern to create new pipelines For example, based on a template, create a dedicated pipeline for each of the pull requests, which can be just deleted at the end of the pull request. So, and that's another powerful part of the abstraction, that it's very easy to create new pipelines and delete pipelines, and it's more like the Lego that you can do whatever you would like to do from the elements. So that's the summary, is that I really like it. There are some annoying limitations, which, for example, when I would like to trigger something just now, there is no API to trigger this build with one for this resource or the other resource. So what can I do is just I need to pin first the version, which means that all of the builds will use this version next, and after that I can trigger a new build, which means that this version will be used. And after that I need to unpin. But I didn't find any API to say just, okay, please create a new build for this one. If you already had a build, then you can do it, because you can say that you run it with the same inputs, and the same inputs supposed to be exactly the same. So that should be possible if you have the version. So it's very simple, but I think because the abstraction, it's quite powerful toolset. So thanks to watch this video, and we'll continue from here next time.